Welcome everyone to the Vol Performance online workshop series. For those of you who haven't been part of the Vol Performance series, what we're trying to do here is create a platform to share knowledge and empower people during a time of uncertainty. And what we've been able to do over the last couple of weeks is create an online platform to help facilitate creative discussions and enable some sharing of knowledge and ideas and experience across high performance, both within the performance setting and sports medicine. The online series is here to provide a platform for some of the world leading experts to share their information and share their experiences in developing high performing athletes and hopefully resilient athletes. The way that we've been releasing most of the content is via either on-demand presentations. There's some pre-recorded presentations on the Vol Performance platform at the moment, with follow-up live Q&A opportunities. And then, like today, we have a live webinar format where the guys that have logged on will be able to ask questions of the panelists, which I'll facilitate. So if you haven't seen the previous on-demand presentations, you can follow the link on the Vol Performance landing page and watch any of these presentations on demand prior and see the future recordings that we've got as well. The main concept that we're trying to achieve with the Vol Performance series is to really help build connection and collaboration at the moment across different sporting organisations and sporting codes. And I think today is a great example of being able to lean on some experts from different sporting codes, and are really looking forward to this. Welcome to the Olympic series we have here on the Vol Performance online platform. We're really fortunate to have 4 fantastic practitioners joining us today to talk about the impact of the postponement of the Olympics in 2020 and just talk to us about their experiences over this time, but then also moving forward with the athletes and the teams that they're working with. I'm going to throw to Paul Pearce to introduce himself first, and for the crowd to get to know him.
Great, thanks Selwyn. Thanks for having me on board. My name's Paul Pearce. I'm a sprints coach here in Brisbane, Australia. I look after predominantly young sprinters, 100, 200, 400 metre runners. Currently looking after Riley Day, who's just 20 and has been to selected the last couple of World Championships and Commonwealth Games. Also currently working with the Queensland Reds, looking after their speed side of things. And also here working with a couple of schools as well. So I'm full-time sprints coaching at the moment. Come from a sprinting background myself. Went to a couple of World Championships and Com Games and things like that. So was relatively successful without going all the way to the very top end, but started my coaching career probably about 12 years ago, under the guidance of a couple of great mentors like Cliff Mallett and John Quinn and these types of people. So here in Australia, so really enjoying what I'm doing at the moment. But obviously it's challenging in this age at the moment as well. So looking forward to having a chat and going from there. Thanks.
Thanks, Paul. Really looking forward to your insights with some of the athletes you're working with. We have Shane Kelly with us from the British Athletics. Shane, introduce yourself, please.
Yep. Hi there, Selwyn, and hi everyone listening. As Selwyn says, my name's Shane Kelly, and I'm currently head physio with British Athletics. I started my sort of journey into elite level athletics, back in the mid 2000s, working with some of Australia's best athletes at the time as a sort of personal therapist. And, at the time I was working with Steve Hooker and Craig Mottram, and sort of cut my teeth as a young physio there, and doing a bit of work for Athletics Australia back in the day, a few camps and things like that. And I suppose that work then led me into getting the AIS scholarship in 2009, which then took me to the UK in 2010. So in 2010, I made the leap to Britain and took a job with British Athletics, a job based out of Loughborough. and I've been based in Loughborough since 2010, working at the National Performance Institute, which is the main training hub of athletics in the UK. As I said earlier, I'm the head physio now with British Athletics and have been for the past 5 years. And obviously as a therapist and someone who's really keen on getting involved with the Olympics this year, yeah, it's obviously massively challenging to the whole performance group at the moment, and we're all readjusting. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the conversation today and telling the listeners how that's all going.
Thanks, Shane. Tim Pillow from United States Olympic Committee, if you want to introduce yourself, mate.
Sure, thanks, Selwyn. Tim Pillow here, out here in California, United States. I'm with the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic team. I have been in this role that I have. I'm a senior strength and conditioning coach. I've been with the organization now since 2010 in my current role. Over the course of that time, I worked with some within USA Swimming. I've worked in beach volleyball, indoor volleyball, water polo, and my current situation, I'm responsible for 2 teams, men's indoor volleyball and women's water polo. Prior to this role, I worked in a private setting. I owned a business for a couple years. And then I've also spent some time in some small professional sports. And I've danced around our Olympic movement here. I've been a strength and conditioning practitioner back in the early 2000s in Lake Placid, New York, with a lot of our winter sports, our sliding sports. And then I spent a stint in Colorado Springs as well at our Olympic Training Center headquarters. So it's been an interesting journey, and I'm excited to be here and having the chat.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I think some really good insights from some of the team sport aspect that will be really interesting today. And we're really fortunate to be joined by Alex Stewart. Alex, if you want to introduce yourself to everyone.
Sure. Thanks, Selwyn. Thanks for having me. So my name's Alex Stewart, and I am a jumps coach based in Sydney, Australia. By way of chance, I work predominantly with high jump and world-class high jumpers at the moment, which every day I think is crazy because I never did high jump. I was never any good at it. I could jump, but here I am with 3 world-class high jumpers. One being Brandon Stark, who is the current Australian national record holder at 2.36 meters. Another being Eleanor Patterson, who recently broke the Australian women's national record, jumping 1.99 meters. And another being Marco Fascinotti from Italy, who has a personal best of 2.35 meters. I'm currently entering my 11th year of coaching and probably 8th year of coaching world-class athletes. Maybe a little bit different than everybody else on the panel this morning. I work purely independently. I've never worked for a federation or for an organization, which has its positives and negatives. Maybe I can offer some different perspectives compared to others. We'll see. Yeah, and that's pretty much me.
No, it's great, Alex. The fact that you've got both Australian men's and women's record holders is a testament to obviously the work you've been doing, mate. So looking forward to the conversation. I guess with the postponement of the games, a lot of the conversation has been around how, as coaches, we've assisted in goal setting with our athletes and possibly needing to change goals given we have more time. Alex, I might throw to you first that with the world-class athletes that you've got, how did that adjust what you had planned and what does it look like now?
Well, I've probably got 3 good and 3 very different examples with the athletes that I already talked about. The most straightforward one is Eleanor. So Eleanor had a automatic qualifier. So barring any tragedy, she was on her way to the Olympic Games. Brandon had not jumped an automatic qualifier by the time the games were postponed, but based on the world ranking system, for which he was ranked number 3, it was kind of unlikely, very unlikely, that he was going to miss out. And Marco was desperately in need of competitions and was chasing points and heights. But saying that, like, everybody was in a different scenario, but to me, it didn't really change the plan or the way that we approach it. Because the games being moved is essentially beyond our control. So the path I'm taking at the moment is just to approach it like any other year, and I'm trying to kind of implement my training cycles as best as I planned them anyway.
And with Marco, who, you know, I guess is requiring more competition, how have you helped manage, I guess, his expectations around the stresses associated with knowing that once the qualification period starts, it is really important for him to be able to hit certain heights in order to qualify?
So in working with all 3 of these athletes, I'm pretty fortunate to have 3 very switched on and highly driven individuals. So it really wasn't a case of me actually having to do anything or say anything to Marco. He actually approached me as soon as the date for the games was announced and said, well, I've just got to be prepared and ready to go whenever the opportunity arises.
I think that we wish we all had athletes like that probably are that inclined to be aware of their position. Shane, have you got any insight into any of the guys that you've worked with that possibly have already qualified versus guys that haven't qualified?
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to Alex's situation. There's probably a handful that have already qualified, but really probably the majority still had to get qualifiers this season. And where we would sit right now is, you know, sort of end of April. It'd very much be some athletes would have already started competing this European spring/summer. But obviously, 4 or 5 weeks ago, that all got paused. A stop got put to that, and all their goals of the season, you know, had to get put on pause at the same time. I think it is an uncertain time. I think being a therapist, we are constantly sort of waiting to hear what the athletes' goals are. You know, what are they aiming for now? And when the Olympics was cancelled, that was one thing, postponed, that was one thing. But the sort of certainly the UK athletes, the British athletes thought, well, we've still got European Championships to look forward to at the end of the season. And then last week that was cancelled. So the European Championships aren't going to happen anymore. And so, you know, now we're maybe only looking at a handful of Diamond Leagues towards the end of the season, and maybe a British Champs as well. And so what was going to be quite an important and big season is now dwindling away, and opportunities to compete are getting smaller and smaller, and they're only going to be for the very few. So it's constantly shifting sands with goals and for athletes. And so me as a therapist, just trying to keep track of that on a weekly basis is interesting. But, you know, we are at the whim of the British government, and when things and the other governments throughout Europe, and, you know, until every one of those is clear about, you know, easing of restrictions and things like that, I think the goals will sort of form, the goals to compete this season will form as those restrictions change.
Yeah, definitely. Paul, you've got a few athletes, obviously, that are preparing to try and qualify for 2021. And with their programs that you've got in place, have you had to shift some focuses, or similar to Alex and And Shane, you're maintaining your current philosophy and just building your training blocks out.
Yeah, a little bit similar. I've got two athletes who are progressing forward and who have Olympic ambitions for the year. Simon, who's a bit more on the mature side, he's 27. I think he's, with age, he's a bit more settled in life and sort of understands the bigger picture a little bit more, and can take these life challenges in his stride pretty well. Riley, who's a bit younger, hasn't been to Olympic Games before, and is really, really hungry and determined to do everything that she can to get there, and will break down brick walls wherever possible to make that happen. The two sides of things there are that Riley's a bit more emotional about it, and when the news came through that that was changed and that we were going to put a different year down, threw up a whole different range of challenges to me to try and sort through, and to make sure that she understood that, and she comprehended that it wasn't just happening to her, it was happening to all of us, and we all had to deal with it in different ways. And we got around that. It took a little bit of time. Everyone goes through those different emotions around different cycles of anger and disappointment and things like that. But similar to Alex, my philosophy on training and how I go about things and where I want them to go doesn't really change. I want them to keep pushing and keep, like you said, Selwyn, about goal setting, and keep challenging themselves through each cycle with their training blocks, and to get outcomes, and to really be focused on those outcomes and get better every single 3, 6, 12 months 12 weeks that we're looking at. How are they going to improve there? What it's going to mean though is that it's the competition side of things. These young athletes, they're built around competition and competing and really wanting to always be better and challenging themselves and to win. This is what makes them better than just Joe Public out there. They're hungry for it. It's the competition side of things that I think is the biggest challenge for us to keep stimulating that. I've gone down the path of deciding whether or not travel restrictions are still in place at all, that we're still going to do a competition phase for about probably 4 to 6 weeks in September, October. And again, depending on who can travel and where or anything like that, if it has to be here local, and we do it with other squad members and other people that are local and make it some sort of different stimulus, then that's what we'll do. If it can be bigger and we can include more of Australian people, then we'll put that invitation out and go from there. It's just one of those things that I want to try and create that stimulus to make sure that they're focused on getting to that next point. I really don't see the point in having a 10-month grind of, just down hard work without any real challenging stimulus there. That's mentally, that's a really tough thing to try and get your head around. That the only time that probably athletes ever do that would be if they're coming out of a massive rehab. Shane, I think you'd probably see a lot of those, of the long, arduous rehab sort of side of things. And I don't want their headspace to be there. I want them to be focused on competing and to try and get better. And for me as a coach also, it allows me to see how my programs are going. Am I getting the right stimulus out of each athlete? Am I getting the results that I want? Because Riley's in a really good position to qualify for the Olympics recently on the points basis. She was top 40. She was pushing towards an official qualifier, but she was in there and going well. And like all of us, we hadn't got to the point of the end of the season where we could really see exactly what they could do. So, I said to her that this is where we're at. We're already better than the last 18 months before we got to this point. it's only going to get better. 12 months more of added training, added extra push in all areas, speed, strength, power, you name it. It's all going to get worked on in that time. So, yeah, we just head down, bum up, and just keep throwing challenges at them.
Yeah, I think what you touched on there with the camp competition stuff and how that sort of, I guess, intensity and standard that isn't there, how you can find a way to maintain a similar training stimulus is the balance. Tim, you work with more team sport athletes and a lot of different personalities. Have you found anything different with what you've needed to do to maintain engagement and to keep high standards with their training?
It's really great. I love listening to what you guys have been sharing so far. Man, team sports is just different. That's so different. And I think I use the term herding cats quite a bit. I mean, obviously you're herding cats when you have really strong personalities in any given situation. And when I hear Paul, when I heard you talk, and Shane, when I heard you talk, and Stuart, as I'm hearing you talk, you guys are in athletics, and I think about the type A personality that's very rigid, that is used to having their plan, and they have to do this on this specific day, and if they don't, they kind of fall apart, and I think about that, and team sport. I mean, we have a handful of those type A personalities, but at the same time, we have a large percentage of guys who just like to play. They just like to go and have fun and play their sport. And the fun that they find is being crafty and creative, as they're, playing another team or playing another individual. It's like the game that they play is one-on-one, and it's versus me versus a clock, or, and it's just different. And to hear kind of the way you guys are sharing some of those stories, those are some of the things that go into my mind. We were really fortunate. The two teams that I serve have both qualified for the games last summer. So the water polo team was qualified last June, and then the men's volleyball program, we qualified in July. So the team is qualified, but the people that are going to make up that team has not yet been solidified. We have a national team, but you don't know who's going to be on that team until, whenever the coach decides to make the Olympic team, who's going to be on that roster. So, for example, and I have a couple offshoots that I'd like to maybe hit on that maybe touch on some of the things you guys shared. For our water polo program, we'll carry a training roster of about 22, and then we'll travel 13. For men's volleyball, we'll have a training roster anywhere between 25 and 35, and then we'll travel 13 to 14. So every single practice is super competitive because everything is statted. All the metrics are taken into consideration for every practice, and that goes into the decisions that are being made for who's going to make the roster for the next tournament. So one of the things that I see in my role on the team sports side is we have athletes that this delay in the games is doing two things. One, it's delaying athletes from retiring. We've had a number of athletes that they went to the games in Rio, and 2017 came around, and they're thinking, oh man, I don't know, I think I'm kind of done, I'm not really sure if I'm going to do this again. And then they kind of get the itch back, come late 2017, and then they jump back into the training group in 2018, and then they're like, oh yeah, okay, I think I can do this again. So then they're recommitting, knowing that Tokyo is an end date. Like, that is going to be the end of my career as an athlete. And so they commit to that period of time. Now, whatever that time looks like, yeah, chaos, out of controls things, like all that's part of it. But, the ability I can hold on to that far, and then I'm going to let go. I can commit. And what we found is that some of the athletes that we're expecting 2021 to be a complete rest year, a complete like, hey, I'm going to start my life then. I'm going to start, I have women athletes. They want to have a family. I've got male athletes that have, that have been in their sport. This will be their 4th Olympics, and their bodies are broken. I mean, they're tired. They tape up. Their warm-ups are about as long as a practice is in and of itself, and they want to go to the games again. And that's just a completely different psychology that we're dealing with. And on the other side is that, some of the water polo players that I work with, they're still in college, they're still in university. And the way that the NC2A system works is that the NC2A system would grant a 1-year national team waiver. So before the Olympic Games, you could train away from your college with your national team or with your national coach or coach that you're working with to prepare for the games. And it doesn't go against your scholarship. So our water polo program has been in full-time training for the past 8 months. So they burnt that waiver is now burnt. So now what does that mean for the fall of 2020 or the spring of 2021? So now are they not going to get the full ride scholarship that they were going to get? So is their education that that is getting paid for, and their college coach is now saying, hey, I can't give you 2 years of you not being with me because I recruited you to be on my college team. Like you need to be here to help our college out, our university. So then we have athletes that are being tugged back and forth. Like they want to be an Olympic, they want to be an Olympian. They want to go to the games, but they at the sacrifice of potentially losing their collegiate, their education. I'm also really fortunate, some would say more challenging, but a lot of the athletes that are in the 2 sports that I work with they're pretty intelligent. We, a large number of Stanford, USC, UCLA's, Texas. I mean, we get some really bright individuals that are coming through our programs, and it's great. However, those educations mean a lot for them when they're done with their athletic career. So there's a lot of things that we're navigating with. We'll probably talk a little bit more. Paul, you said something about the 10-month grind, and Stuart, you said something along the lines of, we don't really change too much. We're going to stay even keel. One of the things that I've used to in my past used to be a big advocate of is this idea of trusting the process. And I've completely, not that I don't trust the process anymore, but I think I almost preach that it's more important to trust the people that have helped you make your process, because those are the people that are going to continue to look out for their best interest when things go awry. And they're going to help you make a new process based upon everybody's best interest. And so I don't know, it's interesting to me. So that's kind of where we are right now.
It's definitely interesting hearing you talk about the collegiate athlete, and when we talk about education and the importance of an athletic career, maybe only lasts so long. So what are you developing outside of that is really important. The other component, which most of you touched on, was around competition and training intensity. How currently, without having that major stimulus and possibly without having training partners as well, how are you maintaining a high level of output? Alex, do you have any insight into how you're currently doing that with your guys?
Sure. So actually this weekend, Brandon was scheduled to compete in Japan. So because we've been kind of continuing on the same training cycle, we decided to schedule a mock competition within training anyway, to try and stick as closely to that cycle as possible. So we've kind of agreed on a predetermined height progression for the day, and I've organized for that to be filmed by a biomechanist, so we can, kind of get all the data and everything available that we'd normally get from a competition. Of course, I'll be exercising social distancing protocols and going for a run during that time. And as I said before about being fortunate with like highly driven individuals, Brandon's not really fazed by the fact that he has to jump on his own. I mean, high jump being a sport essentially where it's you versus the bar, you have to be incredibly driven as an individual anyway. So for him, it's more about getting the feeling of that good run up or that good takeoff that he's been searching for in the season so far. And I actually think he's not too far off. And if he can actually hit it, then that really will propel him into his next block of training. Which kind of highlights why having competition is so important. And I think Paul talked about the mental side of it, but I also think for the emotional side of it, really just to get that, it's the stimulus that training can't provide, and it's the places that it can't take you emotionally, that competition offers. So so we'll continue to add in those competitive trials, mock competition things. We'll measure things day to day within training just to kind of check the progress here and there. And if the opportunity to compete late in the Northern Hemisphere summer comes, then we'll take it.
Yeah, perfect. Shane and Paul, you guys work with top end sprinters who are, have got to hit really high velocities, and possibly in training they're, depending on coach philosophy, they may train either close to that or kind of or off their competition intensity. Shane, how have you seen the programs change dependent on that, and because competition isn't there, and how you're monitoring that guys are actually exposing themselves to enough load in regards to percentage of their training max or competition max?
Really, really good question, and it's actually very topical. And as a sort of performance support team, we're trying to get our heads around that at the moment. It sounds like our situation in the UK is completely different. Perhaps Paul and Alex is in that the training facilities just aren't open in the UK. The big training bases in London and in Loughborough have been shut down. A lot of the local tracks have been shut. So athletes simply just don't have access to tracks at all. So we can't get our sprinters in spikes even to run on tracks at the moment. We can't get our field eventers to jump, to close to a pole vault pit or to a high jump mat or to a long jump run up. For the speed power athletes, it's a real struggle at the moment to get that high intensity stimulus. And, we knew that from the moment we were locked down, it was going to be tough in the UK to get anywhere near that training stimulus, not only on the track, from your technical events or in the weights room as well, because all the gyms are shut. And so the reality for most of our athletes at the moment is that they're, running on roads, running on trails, maybe sneaking into a track and jumping the fence and trying to do a session that way. But there'd be very few that have been able to pull spikes on and hit max velocity in the last 4 weeks. And we kind of knew that was the landscape when lockdown happened. So our message has been quite different, and different to Paul, different to Alex. We almost can't keep that intensity at the moment, and the message to the athletes has just been drop the intensity and actually just maintain with what you've got at home, and maintain with whatever little weights setup you can got in your garage, and maintain with whatever running you can get done on the road or on the track or on the track or whatever. But that's been the message, and the athletes have generally taken that on. There's no one doing anything silly. There's no one trying that I'm aware of in our squad that's really trying to push the intensity still, given that there's so much uncertainty of when they'll be able to compete again. So then what you've got is obviously a step down in intensity, a less big step down in specific training. And the longer the lockdown continues, the longer the detraining effect will go on for, which then obviously means a bigger lead time into when you need to return to performance. So we're trying to get our heads around that at the moment in terms of what is an optimal return to performance. What's safe. We're trying to gauge athletes' current level of training, what facilities they have. We're using our own, we're using things like surveys and other sort of tech tools to get information back to be able to get a snapshot of where they are now. So when it comes time, when we get a bit of a heads up of when restrictions are going to ease and we can get back into training facilities, that the messages are going to be clear about return to performance, return to training, return to performance, and then, keeping injury risk low, because that's our biggest concern at the moment is if there are competitions at the end of the season, how much time are they going to be left with to do specific prep, given that they can't do any at the moment. So the guys in Australia sound quite lucky with what they can do.
It's a really interesting debate, because I spoke to Matt Tomei from Altus last week and what they're doing. And they've still got some athletes in Phoenix that they're actually putting GPSs on and getting some data, but once again, they may be running on grass, not in spikes. And Stu McMillan put up some info around one of their athletes who had hit 11.5 meters per second probably only 6 weeks ago in their last training block, and then had their 4 sessions since lockdown, and they hadn't hit above 9.5 meters per second. And the discussion is that because the athlete is, like you said, reducing their intensity because that's the message that's been sold, or is it because they're just fearful of possibly being injured while they're training by themselves or training on different surfaces? And Paul, you might have some insight on that, because I know you've been continuing to train some of your sprinters on grass while the track hasn't been there.
Yeah, exactly. So Shane, we here in Southeast Queensland, so we don't have access to any tracks as such. So the hard surface is definitely out. We've been using grass tracks and things like that, which is fine. Got no issue with. We use a lot of grass anyway during our normal training phases, so it's not massively. It's probably just the surface type. Just it's not manicured. It's a little bit sort of all over the place. And I guess that with that brings some injury risk and things like that too. I've got no problem with my guys staying in between the sort of 90 to 95% intensity range. I've programmed it in so, we can do one-on-one sessions, obviously social distancing and things like that as well. So we can go and see that. But when we're doing some of those faster sessions during the week, I've programmed in so that I am actually there watching at the time. The last thing that I really wanted to do, and this is probably the biggest thing that was a concern for me going to lockdown phase, was the injury risk factor. The athletes are used to getting physio, massage, all these sorts of things constantly during the week. And when those sorts of things are taken away, what sort of extra stress does that put on the body, and how is the accumulated effect going to catch up to them at some point? So I was pretty wary of that. And one of the things that when we did our speed sessions, I wanted to have eyes on it. The last thing I really wanted them to do was go out and do their faster sessions with no visual impact. And, the last thing you want them to be doing is overstriding, not in a good technical position, because that's essentially when injury risk goes through the roof. So we've scheduled those. My guys are training in pairs wherever they can, doing similar sessions. I might have a couple of young ones or something like that will jump in with the olders and use them as training partners, just to make sure that it's a good environment and everything up and going. But yeah, the injury risk factor was probably the biggest issue that I saw around us as coaches not being there and not being able to have that contact. I've got no problem at all around the intensity levels dropping, because all that means is that it's a slower progress to get back to your max speed. You know, just because you're only at 85, 90% isn't an issue. It's how fast a coach brings your athlete back to max velocity, you know, and that's probably the one thing that you see with all the football codes and things like that, that we're watching around, wanting them to come back and be training on one day and all of a sudden be playing 3 weeks later. You know, is that a long enough duration to be able to stop all these soft tissue injuries that are, you know, tendon issues that are gonna happen? Jane, you'll probably give us more in space, but I could see that there's going to be a massive influx from professional sport all the way down to, you know, your weekend warriors who get straight back into it. And, you know, physios, Shane, if you were in the private practice, you know, your stocks would be going through the roof, because I can see the physio side of things will just be going, man, rubbing their hands together and going, this is where it's going to come in.
The
So
floodgates
taking them through step by step around how to get back to that high intensity, it's going to end in tears for a lot of people.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and Tim, I guess the difference in that from the individual athlete and what Paul and Alex and Shane are talking about in regards to possibly being able to quantify how you gradually progress in track and field space with prescription around sets and reps, distances and training intensity, you can control those variables a little bit more. But in a team sport environment, it's highly chaotic, the high competitive nature. As soon as guys either get back on the volleyball field or in the water, straight away the competitive juices are flowing. So how do you actually dose that back in to maybe decrease the risk of either contact-related injuries or overuse type injuries? How do you see that playing out?
It's interesting. Like the quadrennial process and kind of where we come from, starting from in this quad specifically 17 to 18 to 19 to 20, every year builds upon itself, and the work that we're doing is strategic. And I'm a big believer, and this is going to sound cliche, but I'm a slow cooker in performance. I really am. And so it takes us a long time to get to where we were just a month ago. And we kind of stand on all the work. And the analogy or metaphor that I use is kind of like, year one is, we cut the key, for the car. And then year two, we stick it into ignition, and year three, we turn it. And then year four, we accelerate and we drop the hammer and put some gas into the motor. And so we're pretty slow around that. And for the purposes of what you guys are talking about is injury, we're trying to control progressions and not asking the body to do things it's not quite ready to do. And all that being said is context to the momentum that we have with, I'll just speak specifically with our polo program. We've been in full-time training every single day. The girls are training up to 32 hours a week. And there's been a lot of momentum training, 32 hours a week. I mean, that what that looks like. And in team sport, let me back up, in individual sport, and I'm not in individual sport, so if I misspeak here, please correct me. We have the physical side of things, the fitness, cardiovascularly or respiratory. We have our strength, we have our power, we have our resiliency, stamina. But then we also have the technical aspects of how do we operate within our job? Like what, if we're a hitter or an attacker in volleyball, like how should my hand be? What should my shoulder be? How does my takeoff look? And then on top of that, or how am I passing a ball? Or if I'm a polo player, how, should I have my elbow here? Should I have my elbow here? So there's the technical side of training. And then you have the tactical side of training. So how do I play with this other player? Like, what is my chemistry? Because I can have good IQ. I could read the game quite well, but if I can't play well and I can't work off these other players that are on my team, there's like a cohesiveness component to this process of building a team. And so instead of being individual, like now, how can we build this cohesion where we're all getting along? We're all, we have momentum as a team. And then there's the other side of it as of being able to read what the opponent is doing. So can you understand what's about to happen? Have you done your homework on, Australia? Have you done your homework on the Dutch team? Have you done, and so reading, and so lots of video, lots of like studious work that we've been doing in preparation to get to April of 2020. So there's lots of, if you think about periodizing all of these things, how much time do we periodize reading other teams? How much time are we periodizing making sure that we have specific players on the court at specific times and getting their chemistry and getting their flow to work with one another? And then you have the technical work. So, and then the strength and power and all these, so there's so many variables. And to your point, like, how do we objectify load and how do we objectify how much they should be doing? And that's really difficult. It's we try to come up with ways to, for volleyball specifically, you think, well, how many swings are they getting on the ball? How many jumps are they doing? And so you can start to measure, the number of jumps an athlete is doing, because now you're looking at workload on their knees, you're looking at workload, through transferring energy through the shoulder on swings. But not all swings are created equal. Some are super high intensity and some are just like a chip shot, just like or even a tip roll. And not all jumps are created equally either. A 20-inch jump or is not the same as a 42-inch jump. And so jump counts are nice to have, they're important, but the magnitude of those jumps are something that we try to gauge. But a lot of it comes down to, some of our athletes have high thresholds to the work that they do. So if we have, for example, and I will shut up on this, but if we have built up our tolerance to jump counts and we've built up our tolerance to the magnitudes, it's not the same athlete that it was 4 months ago. And so we can actually add more work to their plate. And so in April, we've gotten to a point where we've created so much momentum, we're actually able to train super hard. And the work that we're doing on Friday is amazing. It's powerful, it's strong, it's quick, it's sharp. And that's because they've had a lot of time training. So they're super fit. And then the shutdown comes, and all of this momentum that they've created, that they're used to, the 30 hours a week that they're committed to, is just blown up. So now what our biggest challenge is, how do we deflect all that momentum? And if we didn't have so much momentum, it wouldn't be such a big deal. But since there's so much that we have asked of the athlete, emotionally, mentally, the time commitment of their day, like now they're just like, well, what now do I do? And so it's been a big challenge, to the point of emotional challenge, and the point of just keeping them busy, because now they just have a lot of free time. So now what are they doing? So we're putting books out, hey, this is what you should be, there's some things you could be reading. There's some good information you can be putting in your head. This is how other athletes have dealt with challenges, and this is how athletes have dealt with despair and things that they can't control. We got team meetings every day. We're trying to stay connected as a team, because when we're all being completely separated, we're trying to find many opportunities to at least be connected, to have accountability, but just to see each other's faces. And that's just, some team sport challenges. Water polo, we're looking, we trying to get girls to continue throwing. They got to keep the arms in motion. With the jumpers, we're trying to make sure that they're getting their landings. For us, it's not so much about their jumps, it's about making sure that they're landing some pretty high elevations and not doing it too much. And also at this point in time, spending lots of times with our coaches and our assistant coaches and educating them on, hey, when we do get back, the players are going to not be in the same physical shape. And the coaches need to kind of make sure that they can understand that as well, because the coaches will be very easy, like to you guys are the head coaches, unlike me. So a lot of my time is educating them. Like, we could be creating a lot of problems here if we think that we can just jump right back into the same kind of drills that we were doing before the shutdown. And so just being really smart about that. And it's not just me. I'm part of a team, and we've got some really good medical staff and other assistant coaches. So those are just some of the challenges that we have. A lot of it is managing the emotional side of things as much as it is the physical side of things.
One of the other things also is that we talked about, from my side of things, we talked about the running side of things and how that's a challenge. But the gym and the strength training side of things has also been challenge because the gyms are closed here. So you don't have your normal access and things like that. And I think that's where your strength and power coaches have really had to step up and come get creative with what athletes have. You know, when we saw this all coming, we did a very quick audit of what each of my athletes had available to them. You know, what was at home, what could they use, you know, jump online, grab as many bands as you could, grab all these different things that the general public all of a sudden when it exploded, you know, you can't get anything now online. I think you're backdated for months. But one of the things that we had to challenge was to keep stimulating the muscles in a different way, you know, and to try and keep the eccentric load, the isometric load, all these sorts of things going so that, you know, it's like, you know, you can't just be trying to do all this work on the track and trying to keep running and doing these things without the strength component to it. So, you know, here in Queensland, Queensland Academy of Sport were fantastic, and they let us take gym equipment out of their main facility. So we stacked up athletes at home so they could start doing gym, you know, stuff, whether it's an Olympic bar with some weights and things like that. You add some bands, you add some balls and bits and pieces, and you've got yourself a program. Chris Gavilio, who looks after our strength side of things here, you know, he's earning his money now. He's the one that's coming up and getting creative and having to try and work through all these different complexities. You know, he's got his BFR cuffs, his blood flow restriction cuffs that we can add extra load to and try and challenge the body in those ways. So, you know, it's just because you're used to something doesn't mean it has to be that way. I think you just got to have that awareness that when you do go back and you do go back into your normal gym and your normal environments, that it's not just this is the program, we pick it up as we left it and go on from there. So yeah, it's interesting times.
It's definitely forced strength and conditioning coaches to critically analyse their program as what is important and what is the minimal dosage that you can apply to either maintain a stimulus that's enough to continue to allow the athlete to adapt, or kind of like what Shane was talking about before, to maintain enough stimulus so that they have a certain degree of tissue resilience to withstand their current training program and what they're going to have to do moving forwards. And I think for me personally, I found it exciting to review, all right, well, this is what we do when we're in our normal AFL season, but we don't have either equipment availability or we don't have accountability around what their compliance is. So how can I give them the best possible program that'll prepare them for the rigors of AFL football while I'm not there eyeballing exactly what they're doing and assessing exactly what percentage of RM they're using, or having a gym aware attached and assessing velocity of movement. So it's been a really interesting component. And I think the education side of things, as what Shane and all of you have touched on, is that's the component that as long as you educate the athlete on this is what we're trying to achieve during this period, because if we can do this right, then when we get back, we will hopefully be able to integrate you into more sports-specific conditioning or sports-specific lifting as early as possible, we're going to have an advantage. And as Tim touched on, then hopefully we're able to train as a team for greater amount of hours, greater duration, which in team sports, team cohesion and your ability to work together and understand where you fit within the dynamic of the context of the game is more important than what our guys' bench press numbers were while they were in lockdown. That's just not important to success in our game. The one thing that I wanted to touch on, and it sounds like for Alex and Paul, you guys have had great athletes to work with in regards to the sacrifices that they've made for success of, you know, individual sport, but also them dealing with adversity. They seem to have seen it as an opportunity to build their character and perspective in enhancing their program. Shane, have you had any guys that it's actually been the opposite and you've had to really focus on their mental well-being and engage them with the program and are kind of worried with their compliance around their program?
Yeah, look, I wouldn't say we're worried, but there is awareness. And I think early in lockdown, everyone had good levels of motivation to stick with the program as much as they possibly could, or stick with their maintenance program and apply themselves fully. And look, most of them are happy training by themselves, and that's not so much of an issue. There's a couple that really like their training group or rely on it, but everyone sort of deals with it. So when it comes to motivation and compliance with training sessions, I think generally the group have been pretty good so far. I think as lockdown continues and as uncertainty continues as well, I think things might get difficult. And that's where, to use the word again, creativity. We as therapy staff, strength conditioning coaches, the individual coaches themselves do have to get creative, change the emphasis of training, give the athletes new goals within their training sessions, something to get them through the next 3 weeks. Get creative with your way of communication. Is it a phone call? Is it through Skype? Is it on social media? Is it group-based work? And that's something we've sort of we might be moving towards soon. Is athletes are currently predominantly doing their own individualized training programs, and that's kind of what happens in athletics. But maybe as a way to sort of lift engagement in the future, we look to do more group-based stuff online to sort of to keep it interesting, to have that sense of connectedness and cohesion, and just to do something different for once. They're still getting a stimulus, and they're still getting a stimulus that's relevant, but it's just doing it in a different way. Regarding mental health, though, I think we're all aware of it, and there's concern that there might be mental health issues creep in, and anxieties with not being able to perform, or maybe getting injured or missing opportunities and things like that. I think I'm not aware of anyone that's really struggling with that aspect, but we've certainly been drumming the mental health awareness stuff with our athletes and coaches, and there's various sort of bodies and hotlines and things and call and that athletes and coaches can make contact with. Plus, we've got a pretty good support structure within our own organisation as well, and we can be first point of contact for athletes and coaches if they need it too. So we're aware of it, but at the moment I don't think it's a massive issue. It'd be interesting to see where things are in a month's time if we're still all stuck at home at the end of May and no clarity of when we're getting out, so to speak.
Yeah, definitely. Paul, Tim, or Alex, did you have anything to add to Shane's comments there?
Probably one thing that I would mention is I think for my guys, they've been fine from a mental health viewpoint. Motivation-wise, they've been fine. Emotionally fine. But I know a few of them are concerned from the financial side. While for the most part, they're all okay and they'll survive, the biggest thing that's been taken away from them is the opportunity to earn. And I guess a lot of athletes are in that boat. But in terms of what they've expressed or what I've noticed, that would be the major impact of the current environment.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Alex. I think there was Olympic year is a big year for track and field athletes, and opportunities to compete, endorsement, and it's a big year for their contracts as well in track and field in terms of delivering or not. It has messed them up a little bit in that area too, and I think again now is okay, but let's see where we are in a couple of months' time. If there's zero competition at the end of the season, I think that'd be a real problem.
Is the risk there that when qualifications and competitions start back up, there may be a greater density to it for athletes to qualify? So athletes will want to possibly compete more than they usually would, one, whether it's to get financial remuneration, or two, because of the anxiety around qualifying. Is that a risk moving forward as well?
it is a risk, no doubt. But I mean, from my perspective, and I think Tim talked a lot about tolerance to load and being prepared to return to training of a certain level. If the tolerance is not there, if the readiness is not there, then the financial side of it doesn't become relevant anymore. It's not relevant. So the risk of injury is far greater than the risk of not having money to them. It's the risk of not being able to perform in the future.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. The slow burn or the slow cook, like Tim touched on before, to performance. If you sustain a significant injury, what that could cost you in preparation time and building up to actually compete versus the gradual continued progression of reducing intensity, as Shane spoke about, to make sure you're maintaining a training stimulus versus pushing them over the edge. And Paul touched on it, knowing that which sessions are possibly high risk. It sounds like, Alex, with what you're doing with putting a training intensity stimulus in there with a mock competition, but then having biomechanics assessment and having yourself there and predetermining some heights. You're managing some of the risk within that, but getting the performance benefit as well.
Yeah. Really, the biggest thing is just managing what it all looks like at the other end. And, you know, I've talked about wanting to keep everything as close to normal as it potentially is, but if there becomes a chance that it's going to impact what happens next year or in the preparation for the Olympic Games next year, then we pull everything back. You know, it doesn't have to be what we know it to be all the time. If it can be, good. If it can't be, then that's fine.
Yeah, definitely. And that probably flows on to my next question to the group around how long do we think we need in order to return guys to that protective, I guess, sport-specific level. Shane, you touched on it. It's kind of your dialogue at the moment, and there's no one right answer, and it probably is impacted on what they've been able to do throughout the training load period. So maybe, Shane, with your guys having reduced their training intensity, if lockdown was to stop tomorrow and they possibly a competition is available in 12 or 14 weeks time, how long do you feel you need to build them up to be ready for competition again?
Yeah, you said it yourself, Selwyn. There is no magic number, and I wish I could just say to everyone out there, look, it's going to take 6 weeks, guys, and then hope everyone sticks to it. In my position, I'm only there, you know, to support athletes, hopefully make better decisions and give as much information as possible. So it's almost about reflecting what the athletes and coaches hopefully already know themselves, and that's the process we're going through at the moment, is really on an athlete by athlete, coach by coach basis, trying to establish where they're at from a training point of view, you know, what sort of running loads they've been able to do, volumes, intensities, what sort of lifting loads they've been able to do, volumes, intensities, to be able to then have those individual conversations with each athlete and coach sort of group. So yeah, I couldn't tell you at this stage. You know, it would be looking at what they've done for the past 6 weeks, basically, and then trying to make an individual recommendation based on that. But, you know, we're lucky in the British system. We've got therapists attached with every single athlete on the program, and it's between, you know, it's going to be up to the therapist and the S&C staff to establish those training loads, those training intensities, and then feedback and sort of have conversations and then make decisions, and hopefully make informed decisions with athletes and coaches going forward, looking at their competition schedule as to what they want to do. So sorry, mate, no magic number, and we all have to use our brains a bit, unfortunately, on this. But the thing that always changes it, and we've mentioned it just before, is the incentive to compete. And that is a very attractive thing. It's almost hard to resist for some athletes. And if a competition's there and there's being prize money offered and things, you know, it can be so easy just to change your 6-week prep to a 4-week one to get a competition in. And that's where I get concerned as a therapist. When an athlete sort of makes that decision, and you know, you had a plan, you gave some guidance, and it gets changed because there's pressures on athletes that, you know, beyond the governing body, there's agents and shoe companies and things, and those are the things that could be ultimately the factors that make athletes come unstuck. And athletes and coaches need to be really disciplined and think about the bigger picture, as Alex touched on. Think about what impact that might have on next year if you come back a little bit too early. Yeah, but interesting to hear what the coaches have to say.
And from your end, Shane, outside of, I guess, understanding training load and what they've been able to be exposed to, do you guys have readiness markers or performance measurements that you think would give you a good identification of where guys are at, whether it's force plate stuff, strength work, or as you as a therapist in regards to historical physio tests and those sorts of things?
Yeah, I think that, you know, we're ultimately, hopefully, when we do get back in the training centres and we do have face-to-face contact with our athletes again, you know, we've talked about those sorts of things, getting back to sort of maybe something like an initial MSK screening once they come back in, just to get an idea of where their bodies are at. Then obviously spending time with them in those first few weeks, you're getting an idea of what their training is like anyway, and you're getting a really true picture of where they're at from a training load, training intensity point of view. And I think the key thing is, you know, and then we will have strength diagnostic markers as well. You know, and it's about just timing those things for when it's appropriate. The biggest question, I think, and probably the most important one, is going back to the athlete and coach and asking them, you know, what sessions do you think you need to complete to know you're ready? And most track and field athletes know what sort of sessions they need to hit before they compete. And then it's kind of working backwards from there. And hopefully by doing that, athletes and coaches will be able to see how long it's going to take to be able to get back to a max velocity session, you know, out of blocks or something like that, to know that they're ready to go, or maybe even have to do that a couple of times before they're ready to go, or, you know, have to do a long jump session off full approach 3 or 4 times before they feel ready to compete. You know, okay, well, if that's your goal, that's what you need to get back to in training. Let's work backwards from that. Yeah,
that's a great point. Paul, do you have any insight into that sort of return to performance time frame and the protocols that Shane just touched on?
I think it's a really challenging side of things. You know, the difference between probably Alex, myself, and then a Tim who has to work with a squad of athletes and who essentially want to be on the same program, you know, at a certain point. Each athlete is going to be different. You know, each athlete has had different accesses, different availabilities, different training intensities and things like that. So Alex and I are probably a little bit different, that we do have eyes on our athletes and we are actually able to see them move, and we can see how they're traveling and see whether or not there are inconsistencies or anything like that. It's more of a challenge from UK shutdown and American point of view, if you're not having that day-to-day touch points and actually seeing, geez, that athlete looks a bit off today or not quite right, we can pull them back and things like that. I mean, that's the art of coaching, the ability to change sessions and the ability to mix things up and change around if it doesn't look right. You know, it's all good and well to have these awesome programs and to be able to manage load and all the way through. But if an athlete isn't moving the way that you want them to move, that's when it's a flag and you go, no, something needs to change here and we need to go back to it. So from my side of things, physio access and watching them train is still going on. I'm not able to see them as much as I would like to. All of our strength sessions are being done in a Zoom meeting like this as well. So everyone's on there talking banter and chatting and all that sort of thing, and we can have a strength coach watching them move and things like that. It's not the same. It's not going to be hands-on. Yes, let's try and just move that hips under, whatever. But we're a lot closer to where we would be, Shane, from your point of view, from, you know, not having any contact at all. So I think from an Australian point of view, we're definitely in a better position than probably European and American point of view right at this point in time. From a program, going back to what you were saying, Selwyn, around programming, each athlete's different. I'm probably never more than 6 to 8 weeks away from running fast, not to getting absolute, you know, major competition fast, but I'd be happy in that sort of 6 to 8 week range. Simon, however, who is on a 10-day max velocity cycle, he's probably a little bit further away because I'd need him to have at least 4 sessions. So, yeah, that puts him at 40 plus days go through. So everyone's a bit different, but I think we're in a pretty good position currently compared to other parts of the world around how much access and what I'm actually able to see and my confidence levels of knowing how they're going.
Yeah, that's great insight. Alex, do you have anything to add to that conversation around with your, it seems that you're able to get a really good training stimulus out of your guys at the moment. Do you feel that that would assist them in accelerating back to, I guess, competition readiness, or are you still wanting a certain time frame?
No, I think, look, I've been super fortunate with my guys. We have had access to A-Track once a week. So we've been able to jump once a week, and my guys have still been able to kind of hit normal numbers in terms of if we're doing a short approach session, we can still go 20-ish jumps a week, which is good. I mean, like Brandon was still able to jump a short approach personal best 2 weeks ago, which was 2.27 meters from a rolling 5-step approach. So hitting good intensity there. We've done some full approach sessions where we've been able to go around 15 jumps, which is incredibly normal. So very fortunate in that regard. The one downside of the track that we have been accessing is that it's 90 minutes drive away. So, which is not great, because I like to avoid 3 hours a day in a car if I can. And I also don't want my athletes in a car for that long as well. So outside of that, we've been using synthetic grass fields for our other track sessions. So I'd probably prefer, you know, a block of training where we can use the track for all our sessions, just so we do have that tolerance. Time frame wise, what does that look like? I don't know. It probably just comes down to a little bit of feel in terms of how they're responding. I mean, I tend to operate that way largely anyway, just day-to-day conversations, how are you feeling, assessing how their movement quality is visually. And so when I feel that can return to normal, then I'd be happy to proceed to competition.
And do you feel with your guys, you've worked with them for a little bit, that they need a certain amount of competitions before they be hitting peak performance, for example, if we're leading into 2021 games? Is there an ideal number of competitions they do? The only reason I ask is I had a conversation with one other Olympic athlete last week, and he seemed to feel that after 3 or 4 competitions, that's when he feels most ready. So he kind of actually, in the current state of play, he's not too phased because he feels he could get them in prior to the Olympics and feel like he's ready to perform close to his peak, as long as nothing adverse happens between now and then, of course.
So considering that all was going well training wise, and all does go well training wise in the next year or so, I feel like it's somewhat of a broad window, but I could say somewhere between 6 to 10 competitions. And again, it's a broad window for the three athletes that I've talked about today. Brandon probably sits more on the 8 to 10 end of the spectrum, whereas Eleanor could be more so like even on the underside of that, like being 5 to 6 competitions. So we'll essentially just look at the calendar and what's available and plan according to the individual.
Yeah, excellent. Tim, you spoke before about how much you guys had built up from a tolerance perspective, and I guess coming back to preparing for competition, it's going to be a balance between where you were and where you are. What are your thoughts and insights around that?
Well, I mean, as you guys are talking, it's just I'm taking notes on things that are always pretty important for us. And you know, what's interesting is this concept or this idea of training load. And I think it's in the world of training for sport. Now, it's great to talk to actually coaches, the track coaches, because you guys are controlling a lot of the practice and the prescription of specific workouts. You know, oftentimes you'll get a bunch of strength coaches together, you know, on a chat or talking or chumming things up as if, and it's not connected to the greater picture, the one who's actually writing and prescribing what the practice design is going to look like. And so it's really, it's interesting because it sounds nice, but it completely disconnected from what the greater picture is. It's like just a puzzle piece that is a different color. It doesn't even fit in, but it does match the puzzle, but it doesn't fit the puzzle, you know, appropriately. So where I go with that is this idea of training load. And for me, when I think about track and field, and I think about sports like, I'll just, for example, volleyball, you know, change of direction, you know, lateral movement, you know, a forward lunging position, a responsive backward position, a vertical acceleration to a vertical deceleration to another horizontal acceleration. For me, when I think about load, obviously we can go into the two buckets. You know, you have your volumes and you have your intensities. And I don't want to talk about volume because that is easy to kind of understand, you know, more or less. But when we start talking about intensity, the route that I go with load or with intensity, the route that I go is you can go high or low with intensity. And then down that you can make some significant rabbit holes. And what happens sometimes is that most people think that, well, high intensity means, well, we can go to the gym and we can push some high resistance and that's considered high intensity. It is, we're pushing ourselves pretty high. But where my mind tends to go is in sport, what keeps us resilient and what keeps us tolerant and what keeps us, what makes us robust. And in sports where there's change of direction, which then requires a massive deceleratory load. You know, we have to be able to decelerate prior to accelerating. And so for an example, like a 100-meter runner, there's not a massive decelerative load prior to a reacceleration load. And if we go back to all the work done on DOMs and neuromuscular fatigue, whether we're talking about the eccentric RFD, you know, characteristics, or we're talking about the mechanical components of muscle myofibril damage, a lot of that comes down to the eccentric loads and some of the tendon stuff. So for me, managing load is not necessarily managing accelerations, because to me, we're not really breaking down from acceleration. We're breaking down from deceleration. So for us, we try to manage deceleratory loads. And so are those deceleratory loads high deceleratory loads, or are they low intensity deceleratory loads? And so that's where my mind tends to go, because how can we dose athletes with high force activities where there's high bouts of deceleratory loads? For my jumpers, every time they land, I'm very fortunate. The jumpers that I work with they jump high and they have to land on their feet again, unlike landing on their back. And then when I hear the number of jumps that you guys are doing, it's just so different. Our jumpers are jumping in between 150 jumps to 250 jumps in a practice. And the knees, you know, when you think about, me and many biomechanists will argue and debate about good landing strategies, you know, and in the sport of volleyball, you can't, if you're at the net and your hands are blocking overhead and your face is at the net, if you hip hinge back to absorb load through your hips, your face goes right into the net. You can't hip flex. You have to bend your knees on when you decelerate down on the court. And as a result, there's a huge landing load on the tendons and the knee. All the soft tissue, connective tissue structures get a massive, there's a massive undertaking of load. So for me, I'll kind of talk, I'll stop talking a little bit, but for me, I try to dissect when it comes to how are we going to progress forward. It's how am I going to dose them with these high force bouts? And it has nothing to do with trying to get back to training under heavy resistances, because we know that heavy resistance doesn't evoke nearly the amount of force that low resistances do at high velocity. And so for us is for you guys, it would be like, well, I would assume, where do we dose our high velocity moves? For us, it's how do I dose those high deceleratory moves that come from high velocity action? And because that's where we break down. And when I think about robustness, or when I think about tolerance, is that we can continue to repeat a high number of decelerations and still be responsive and still be explosive. I'll see athletes, like, we'll just go back to volleyball, from Monday to Friday will occur 1,000 jumps. And of those jumps, if we are strong and we have good tolerance, our jump heights on Thursday are pretty good, and Friday they're pretty good. But you'll see, like, if we went about volume, but it's just intensity of the jumps, the magnitude of the jumps start to drop. And on the flip side of that, DOMs and mechanical and stiffness and soreness go up the other direction. So so as we start thinking about tissue tolerance and load tolerance, those are the things that come to my mind.
Yeah, it's a really interesting discussion in regards to what the difference that Paul and Alex are facing in regards to having some training availability, being able to have access to a track, possibly being in spikes, versus Shane, whose guys are probably going to take an extra 2 to 4 weeks to build back into their normal program because of the variability from what their normal is. And possibly there's a training advantage to Alex and Paul's guys, because their current training program isn't too dissimilar from what it would be if we weren't in the current situation. And so it's hopefully going to be really advantageous to you guys.
My last piece, my last piece on that is I'm more concerned with our ability to tolerate resisting joint flexion versus trying to maximize the speed of joint extension. So hip extension, knee extension rapidly, which would be more of an acceleratory kind of activity. I'm more worried about, can we resist knee flexion as we decelerate? Can we resist hip flexion as we vertically decelerate or horizontally decelerate? And can we continue to do that over and over and over and over again? Because we know, and I know, the weaker that we are, or when our training tolerance is lower, we don't get into deeper ranges of motion and flexion when we slow down. We kind of get a little taller, our joints don't flex as much, and when we slow down, when we're more stiff-legged, the likelihood of injury is a lot higher. The joints absorb the load, and the muscles don't.
Yeah, definitely agree. Thanks, guys. It's been a really interesting chat today. I hope you've found some value in it, as what Tim spoke about, having the variety of therapists, strength coach, and 2 guys that are coaching really high-level athletes as well. So the conversation's been fantastic. Really want to thank you for your time, and if you've got any further questions for each other, I'm happy to share emails. But yeah, thank you again for your time today. Enjoy the rest of your day, and look forward to seeing your athletes progress into 2021 over the coming months.
Awesome. Thanks, Selwyn.